So, so welcome everybody, and welcome to all of those people that might be watching this. And thank you guys for joining us today. I've got Alosa and Emma with me today, and you're both obviously from Noah's Ark. So I just wanted to say thank you for giving your time. And of course, you both come with such a world of experience working with children, working with teenagers, working with families and adults, and I'm also thinking a lot of your work has been around loss and change and grief and bereavement. And I'm just so aware, as we all are at this moment, that there's so much of, change going on, so many things out of our control at the moment. So I think it's a very timely, relevant topic to discuss today, really. I wonder if you could both just maybe tell us a little bit about yourselves and what you do and your role, perhaps at Noah's Ark, and just what you're doing at the moment there.
Okay, so shall I start off then?
That would be great, Alosa.
So I'm Alosa. I manage the services, therapeutic services at Noah's Ark, and a lot of that includes managing all our school projects. So there's projects we've got in secondary. People out there might have heard of the THIS project.
Yeah.
And I do some counselling with that as well in school. And then we have other projects, the THIPS, which is interventions in primary schools. And bereavement is it's one of those impacting issues, actually, that
of course
I think we find in schools, because it's something that's seen as something, just a normal everyday event, but it can it can bring up, and different issues around loss can bring up those sort of, trigger different things, really, I guess, and it's not as always as normal an event as you might think it. And worked in primary schools, also manages the Play and Creative Therapies project, some of you might have heard of. And we've got the Rainbows, which is obviously that part of that stems from children, primary age children, who have suffered some kind of loss, possibly bereavement, separation, changes, because with all these changes, with uncertainty, with transitions, family change, all sorts, comes that element of loss. So worked quite a bit, actually, particularly in the past, around primary schools, and come across different children and how they manage it in different ways as well, and how it affects them in different, these issues affect them differently.
Thank you, Lois. And I can just hear that you've got a lot on your plate, but the work with children and your therapeutic work is also really important. And of course, you're right. This subject, we can't escape. It's going to affect us all at one point or another. But I guess when people come to see us, there's something a bit more going on as well, and a bit more complicated and a bit more stuck maybe as well. I wonder, Emma, if you can maybe tell us a bit about yourself and your work.
Yeah, hi. I'm Emma. I also obviously work at the Noah's Ark Centre. I also go into schools working with young people and younger children in primary school and secondary school settings, which again, similar to what Alosa said, there's always issues surrounding bereavement and loss with young people and children. It's obviously very different on the level of understanding of that child or young person as to what has happened or what they've even lost. If it's not a bereavement, it could be anything that's changed. Losing even the primary school, going to the secondary school is such a big loss for a lot of children. And I'm also part of the ASD team at the Noah's Ark Centre. So I work with mostly children and families affected by having with a child with autism, and I think there's a huge amount of loss that I work with those families, in sort of trying to help the child understand what's happened, and that person's not coming back. Sometimes the level of understanding is a lot different with that client type, and other times it's supporting that parent, because often a child with autism doesn't have that emotional connection and actually is fine when somebody passes away, and actually that's totally different, and that's upsetting for the parents sometimes. But
Yes.
yeah, so there's a lot surrounding loss with them, and even just having ASD, I think, in the family, the loss of doing things that the parents might have thought they would be doing with these children that they actually can't do because the child's not able to do that.
Yes. Do you know, it just as you are sharing, both of you, and by the way, I'm Natalie. My role at Noah's Ark is, I always forgot to introduce myself, didn't I?
Introduce yourself as well, Natalie. Come on.
So so I'm Natalie, and my role at Noah's Ark is to support young people, and I work very much with teenagers, and do a bit of work with the children and group work and so on. But I'm the young person's counselling coordinator. That's my title, if you like. But I'm just so curious about what you're both saying, and I, as you were talking, I just got such a sense of just how broad and complex the subject of loss is, really. And I'm thinking we've got an hour, but I don't know if that's even going to be enough to cover everything, to really, so hopefully we can do the subject justice. And if you don't mind, I'm going to jump right in because I'm just aware of the time. So I suppose as you guys were thinking, a lot was sort of percolating for me, and I was wondering maybe if you could just share a bit about, by the time clients come to see us, I mean, we're all affected with loss and change and so on in our lives. We can't escape it. But I wondered what makes it complicated, and what are the red flags, if you like, by the time they come for counselling. And what are some of the things that perhaps, where they're stuck, or what makes it complicated even?
Yeah.
Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, I think my thoughts on that, thinking of people I've seen over times, and a lot of it can stem from confusion. So something that's confused it, maybe around how somebody's died, or confusion around why something has changed. That clarity hasn't been there for the young child or young person. They can't fit the pieces together, and that's like, that hurts, that feels painful. Not being, pieces are out of joint, they don't know what, and that could possibly, I mean, working with young people who's someone in the family's committed suicide and they didn't know how they died, or had some sort of complex disease that was hard to explain to, and obviously that's quite relevant now, isn't it? Hard to explain to a child. I mean, what's going on now? Oh, a child might, somebody's died of COVID, but do they really know what that means? I know I had a young person whose father died, and I think she was told it was, they had green lungs, and that was just felt confused. That obviously the parent was trying to explain it simply, but then it actually felt quite confusing. What did that mean? So something around confusion, I think, and not feeling like they know what's happened, or what's going to happen. So that uncertainty as well around things that might create. So thinking about the loss that comes with, like Emma was mentioning about primary school, and that loss of primary school, that not knowing how things are going to be different. How am I going to be able to cope in this new situation that's ahead of me without this previous sort of support? Yeah, and sometimes I think also it can be for some other young people, there's something around, often people can lose things in their lives that some people, maybe the people close to them, don't always acknowledge how significant that is to them. I know in Rainbows it can be around, often children have been coming around things like pets, loss of pets, how important that is, or the loss of, I mean, I think about, even you go into adult work that we do, and people's upset about toys that were taken away from them and given away, and that really can stick with people. Or that losing, maybe, I mean, this is relevant maybe for school teachers at school and things, but sometimes losing a grandparent, and maybe schools do have good relationships, obviously, with families and such, but maybe they don't, or they might not always know how important some members of a family might be to a particular child, an auntie, for instance, or and often it's those that aren't always close relatives, and they may not even live in the family home. So it's like, well, why are you still so upset about that?
Yeah.
But that individual might have been really, really like key to that young person's kind of emotional well-being at times of stress. They had somebody that they could contact, talk about things, or so to them that's a huge loss, even though to the outside people they might think, well, that was just, couldn't you for that now?
So Alosa, I'm hearing very much that you're talking around, and I suppose what was percolating for me and coming up for me was just that, well, what you said about having to make meaning about the change or the loss, and also all about the attachment. So for one member of the family it might be a very different process to another member of the family. It may be that what I might call loss, you might think, well, actually that's not a loss to me. It's so individual, isn't it? That's what I'm hearing. And I wondered if I understood correctly, just when you were saying about that it's about them sort of processing it maybe, and but also when you said that, I thought, because there's something about society, and they might not say it directly, but there's something about perhaps somebody a year later feeling like, oh my goodness, actually it's been a whole year, and I haven't moved on, and I'm, and I should. There's lots of shoulds, isn't it? When you're in that process, I should be okay. I should be feeling better by now. I should, and I know people mean well, but people say all sorts of things, don't they? And it can very much, I suppose, for me when I work with clients, I always think of it as it can be quite a lonely experience, really, be going through that. And you were nodding your head, Emma. Can you tell us about what your thoughts were as Alosa was saying?
I'm sort of thinking of the element of responsibility of a loss as well, that it is a lonely experience, but you're all also almost aware that other people have got their own experiences of the same loss if it's a family member. And often I think for both parents and children there's that sense of responsibility not to grieve too much to upset the child, and the child similarly not to talk about it, not because we don't want to upset mum, because mum's really sad about this, so actually I don't want to talk about granddad all the time because that's going to upset mum. And I think for in a counselling experience, a lot with children, it's often just a really good space for them to talk positively about the person that has been lost, that's not going to upset a parent, and they don't have any, they know that the counsellor's not going to be upset about that, and they feel more comfortable to express that.
That's such a good point, Emma. You're both saying such amazing things. It's so jam-packed with such good stuff there. And I just think I can't agree with you more. Just there's something about them really feeling like they've got to protect each other in the family sometimes, and they don't want to say anything that upsets. And so often with children as well, they don't want to, they don't want to upset the parents, and nobody really is talking, and everyone's kind of going through it in their own way. But really, if we can facilitate some of that talking and celebrate it. Sorry guys, go on.
If you sort of think about that in a death of a grandparent, if somebody has then commit suicide where it's a much more complex loss, then that's going to be tenfold, isn't it? That all that responsibility and that blame of self and not understanding where that person's gone and why they've gone, it all magnifies it loads, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And there's something about I suppose that also sort of makes me think about being in control and being out of control, and I guess that can really heighten someone's anxiety when obviously all of this is so much out of our control, so often changes and losses and so on. And I just wondered, do you guys come across a lot of anxiety around this as well, or does it present itself sometimes as depression? I'm just thinking about those clients that get very stuck in the loss, and I also wondered about self-esteem and how that sort of features in that. I wonder if you can maybe say something around that, just of thinking about the clients you guys have worked with, perhaps.
I'm thinking of clients I've worked with, and self-esteem is a big been a big issue, especially when it gets stuck and it feels like there's not been this ability to really process that loss. And I think that process comes in, I think, like you were talking about, Emma, about protecting each other, parents wanting to protect
Yes.
their children, and children wanting to protect their parents, and then that kind of facilitates that stuckness, that open lines of communication become kind of closed, because you think that they're thinking that closing it is their way of protecting each other. Don't talk about it. We can't look back at these. I can't talk about somebody, you know. Whereas maybe, and this is something obviously we talk about with anxiety, there's something about taking that risk to talk about the loved person together. So it's that taking those risks in being able to maybe cry together, that is being vulnerable together, having that lack of control that you were talking about, Natalie. And that's really hard, I think, for family members and for children to instigate and to start. But I think often once somebody in that relationship has kind of instigated that, it can be quite fruitful. And I don't know, makes me think about things like rituals, or I've often talked about with my clients, you know, well, is there something you could do with them, even if you can't talk about them together? Is there something that you could, I know I've had one client that's built something in the garden that's been like a little bit of a shrine for, and they go and sit there, but also other family members can go there. So doesn't have to be so out of control. Rituals sometimes tend to bring a bit of structure to that vulnerability part.
I totally can resonate with that, Alois. You know, there's something about the comfort of rituals, and it also made me think about, you know, anniversaries, and that it's not this like neat little stage model, is it? You know, there are times when you're going to be fine, and there are times when you might be reminded of everything. And you know, I'm just thinking, you know, about clients with their, you know, if this person's birthday or an anniversary of a special occasion, or you know, it's so complicated, isn't it? And having those ways to celebrate, I think it's just so important. I suppose it also brought up the question for me about closure. You know, we use this word closure, and obviously sometimes people don't always have the luxury of closure, or getting to say goodbye, or, you know, sometimes it can be so sudden, or change can be so sudden, losses can be so sudden, as thrust upon one, isn't it? And I suppose I think can be a lot of the reason why people come to therapy, is because they just don't have any way of making meaning with the event that's happened to them.
And triggers, as you're talking there, Natalie, I'm thinking about the triggers, you know, and you were saying about closure and things that can remind. And I mean, a lot of young people, I know I've had my sessions, the things often that come up, and they may have that sense of feeling like they're being jealous of their friends, but is that trigger maybe that what some of their friends are doing this with their mum or their dad, or, you know, the kind of relationship that they've lost, and then they see other peers or friends being able to do that with it. And that comes with comes a lot, not with the death, but with parents that separate, you know. See that kind of seeing what other families do and thinking, I wish we could have our family back together like that. So there's something there about fantasy as well. I'm thinking, you know, the fantasies of how things could have been, how you know, how things could be, and I think that can play a lot in young people's minds. Well, in any of our, you know,
and there's something about it, well, actually it is unfair sometimes, isn't it? It's not what people have signed up for, you know. And there's something about also anger as well that's so woven into grief, isn't it? It's the anger and the not fair and the injustice, and also that grieving of, I like what you said, Alois, so just that grieving of the fantasy, the grieving of the dream sometimes of, was it be like this really?
And I think a lot with young people, especially with social media, seeing other people's family units, or seeing if you've lost a partner even, or like a breakup even, that they're seeing other people's elevated lives on social media, that actually is not how they are every 2 minutes. That's an elevated, you put the best bits on social media. But for someone who's bereaved or has suffered a loss, they're feeling down there and they're seeing up there, and I think that's difficult for people.
Oh, do you know, I just thought, as you were saying that, Emma, it's so true. It's like salt in the wound. But social media's got a lot to answer for sometimes, hasn't it? Yeah, it can give such real salt in the wound, and it just adds to people's pain as well, doesn't it? When you think, oh well, it's all right for some, but
it highlights that comparison, doesn't it? That
absolutely
that people do it anyway without social media as well. It's just
absolutely. And I just remind me of that poem, you know, when Stop the Clocks, because obviously when you've had that, I'm just thinking about the shock as well, you know, when you've lost, and the shock, and it's like your world has stopped in a sense, and then you're watching everyone else's world kind of still carrying on. It's like business as usual. I mean, obviously now we're in this circumstance we're in at the moment, we're all in it together, which is quite unusual really, in terms of change and loss, because so often you're very alone, or people are very alone with that process. Wow, you guys are just saying things, are just making all sorts of thoughts going on in my head at the moment. Wow. So I suppose I was also, one of my sort of thoughts around this, obviously before we even did this, was one of just thinking how different it is for different life stages, I guess, as well. You know, if you're a young child, I'm just thinking about times when, you know, how hard it must be for them to understand, because they're still, you know, they're still making their schema, their brains are still developing, and they have magical thinking, of course. And I just think about sometimes how they say, well, you know, is for instance, is daddy finished being dead yet? When's he coming back? And it's just heartbreaking questions that sometimes they ask, because they just don't understand, and the permanence of you know, the loss and so on, especially when it is an attachment figure. And then I was thinking about teenagers, and of course they're at a completely different life stage. There's so much change going on anyway, and then anything else on top of that can just absolutely knock things right out the water, really. So I just wondered what your thoughts were, and how you sort of adjust your practice to dealing with the different life stages and so on. Any thoughts around that, really?
One, Emma.
I think it's very different in different life stages, and I think sometimes with the younger ones, some of it is teaching and trying to get them to understand what has happened, maybe with creative things, pictures, painting, building models, and trying to explain it that way, or social stories even for my autistic children. That a simple way of telling it as a story and being very specific that this is your dad, he's not coming back, and the emotional side's sometimes not there. Then it's just the understanding for them sometimes, not other times obviously, but older ones, it's a lot different, and it's working with the individual, I suppose, and working out where their understanding is and where their emotional level is as well, because sometimes, like you say, as a teenager, they can be really up and down, and it can really affect them in different, really badly, really.
Sure. And just as you were saying that, Emma, I was just thinking, when I like the way you were you're very overt and giving them the facts, and being really honest. But I guess I suppose that's something that parents so grapple with, isn't it? It's like, how do we protect the child from going to the funeral? Do we protect them from, or how much do we tell the child? Are they ready to hear it? Should we be protecting them? How much can they get involved when they're really little? I just imagine that that's all of the sort of questions that go through a lot of parents' minds, and it's difficult, isn't it, when they're going through their own process as well.
And I think, like you say there, though, Natalie, I think it's taking on those questions, because sometimes I think when we have hard questions like those that are really hard to answer, sometimes our brains find it too hard, and we just go, oh no, we're not going to think about that. The answer is either yes or no. It becomes quite black and white.
Yeah.
And I guess this is a zone I'm thinking where the communication needs to try and be more open in that respect, not quite so rigid, because it will depend on, like you say, Emma, the emotional levels of the child, how parents will know their own children, what's going to trigger them, how do they think their child can cope with it, how can they cope with it, how might they be able, how are they in their grief and in that situation able to support their child if their child was at a funeral and couldn't cope with it, is it and is the child old enough to explain it to and really gauge, well, what do they want? Because I think that's a real significant thing I've picked up, is just not being asked what you want in that situation as a child or young person, and particularly at that borderline where it's even more difficult. You're looking at you're maybe in that transition phase, 11, 12, and maybe you're about to move to high school. I mean, I know I've had a few that in that kind of phase where people have died, grandparents or people in family have died, and I think family have thought, oh no, that would be too much to take them to the funeral or something like that. And maybe it would be, but I think sometimes for the young people it's that they weren't asked.
It's that control, isn't it?
With them. It was just decided for them.
That's so true.
Yeah.
Oh, guys, no, that's so true, guys, and I absolutely can. I think it's so important to give kids, like you say, that choice and give them, if they want to be a part of it, give them a little role, with, even if it's just saying a few words, or their job is to carry the flowers or something, some way that they can feel a part of it, really. I love the idea of giving them a choice. I think that's absolutely so important, really. Absolutely. And I'm just wondering about teenagers. I guess the ones that I've come across with, it's just so difficult, and like you, Losa, sometimes it can be an attachment figure that's not necessarily a parent, so much around grandparents as well.
I think grandparents are huge, actually. When you say grandparents can be a huge
attachment loss. And I find with teenagers a lot of stress. It can just be so stressful as well when they're going through so much already. I mean, life, it's a lot of change going on for teenagers anyway, and they're on a stage and they're under all this pressure from not just school and everything else, but their peers and trying to ask these big existential questions about life anyway, because they're starting to get to that stage where they can hold some of these very complex concepts in their mind and in their in their awareness, and I think then it just opens up such a lot of even more questioning about life, about death, about what's the meaning of life, and maybe even a spiritual aspect to it, and I think that can, for some people, be a huge comfort and resource in the room. But it certainly is so much around what they believe as well, and answering some of those big questions. I don't know if that's been the case with you guys, and what you've perhaps experienced with some of the teens you've worked with.
You go for it, not Emma. Go on.
I think just when you spoke about the spirituality of it, I think that's a massive thing for some teenagers, and I think they struggle sometimes if they're not. I think sometimes teenagers from religious backgrounds, it can bring a family together and they can grieve together, but some that are not find it quite difficult, I think, sometimes. And I've had kids come and see me, and bring in all this supernatural stuff, and they'll speak to a grandparent in the room, and they'll tell me she's sat next to me, they'll tell me what she's saying, they can feel a hug in them, but they don't dare say that to mum and dad, because that'll upset mum and dad, and that makes me sound crazy. But actually it's really helpful for some kids to do that, and the curtains moved, it must be grandma.
And there's something about giving them that space and it just being de-shaming, that we're not going to go, that's ridiculous, or be so judgmental. We give them that safe space, don't we? And that just and I was just thinking about how amazing it is that they can so openly share. And also I was thinking, as you said, that Emma, there's just so many thoughts going on in my mind. But as you said that, I just thought, yeah, because, you know, like Freud was all about, oh, break the bonds and break the ties. But I guess there's something now that we acknowledge about actually those continuing bonds and actually celebrating, you know, not just what you lose, but actually what you gain as well, like celebrating what you're going to take into your future about this person in your life, and some of those strengths, you know, and some of the ways that they've what they've taught you. And I often do an exercise with teenagers just about sort of trying to get some of that, you know, maybe in a sense of like write a letter, or what would this lost person really want you to know that's really important, that maybe the unspoken stuff or the unsaid stuff, you know, that's so important. And it's really a privilege to, I find it just such a privilege to work sometimes with that material, you know, and it's so I guess intimate and personal, but it's a real privilege as well.
I find it can sometimes go the other way though, the spirituality side of it. If it's somebody that they've lost that's not been a positive influence,
yes,
and managed in life to have that distance, then that person passes away. They often think, can they see me now? I've distanced myself all these years, and now I don't know where they are now, and that can be quite terrifying really for them. So
gosh,
it's a double-edged thing sometimes, spirituality, I think, with
yeah. Oh my goodness, yeah, because obviously if you believe that God can see you, then you think that maybe the dead people can too.
yeah.
That makes so much sense.
But sometimes it can be
so
really negative as well.
And that must be very, I mean, yeah, that must be very disturbing and invasive. Oh, Emma, that's such a good point. Absolutely. I mean, I didn't even think about that until you said that. Yeah, no, that's really true. So it just really shows how complex this subject is, and how individual it is for the person.
Yeah, individual, but also I think a lot of what we're saying, a lot of the complexity in it that we seem to be talking about is a lot of is that attachment and that relationship. So the relationships from the past that you may have lost, but also how the relationships in the present and in the future can help process that loss, and how that has a big impact on how that person can move forward positively in growth, but also relationship with themselves as well. Because when you were talking, Nazi, about, you know, those existential questions and teenagers and get to that point where they're thinking more abstractly and thinking much wider concepts and larger scale thinking, you know, and they can, and I think those changes and grieving can bring on that kind of thinking a bit more, and it can sometimes swing two sort of ways. I've found it can either be that, and that's why they become so depressed, because actually if you were to think about these big questions all the time, it can make you feel pretty depressed, and it can make you feel anxious because we don't have the answers to these big questions. None of us do. And I know the amount of times I've said to some of my young people, you know, you're thinking about these big things, it's normal, and some of the wisest philosophers and scientists and thinkers are thinking about these things.
That's so true.
It doesn't make you crazy, but it's finding a balance between realizing how interesting and how big and how meaningful these questions are, but at the same time not being swallowed up by them, that it kind of takes you over and you feel lost and in a nowhere place because you can't, and out of control with it.
That's so good, Alois. That's so good. Absolutely. I mean, if we stop and really appreciate what they go through at that life stage, it's huge, isn't it? It's huge. Yeah. And it can, I guess, feel very overwhelming. So that makes so much sense, and the depression and the anxiety that goes with all of that as well. You know, I mean, you can imagine, I have so much empathy as well, because I just think, gosh, when there's so much changes going on, your body's changing, your relationships are changing, you're going to high school, it's such a new world, and then you have something else go on in your life that's, you know, and it's just huge, isn't it? It's huge. So, oh, guys, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing, and you know, I can just hear how passionate you guys are about this work as well. And obviously it's a subject that touches all of us in so many different ways and brings up things for us as well. And I just wondered, I suppose, you know, in all of this work that we do, is there something about just bearing in mind how we self-care and how we look after ourselves? And yeah, I suppose I just wanted to know what your thoughts were around that. I mean, I was also thinking about people, you know, that professionals in other settings like school, for instance, and you know, it's, I'm just thinking of some of the teachers that can be a very stressful work anyway, and then dealing with the young people's problems, emotions, you know, wanting to be there for them and support them. But there's something about, I guess, caring for ourselves as well in all of that. Yeah.
Something you were saying there, Natalie, I think as professionals, there is an element of us that have, I think you do need to remember that young people are resilient as well. And if they've given, if you've given them that space to open what they want to share, then they've chosen to share what they want to share.
So good, yes.
And so responsibility, as much as they, you know, with it's keeping that as safe as possible for them, but they do still have a lot of choice and responsibility for their own well-being as well. And I think it's knowing then when does that fall into because I say that because I mean you were talking about self-care, and I guess I've jumped straight into the solution without presenting quite the problem, but that problem that we have about as professionals, that we go away and worry about children that we work with, you know, that's what I was thinking as that kind of, and that self-care where you might be thinking, oh well, how can we combat that worry that just niggles at us about children, and we might hear some terrible story or some traumatic things that they've gone through in the past, or the losses that they've gone, you know, and you think, and you do, and you can sit there and you can think, how horrendous is that? So many people have committed suicide in this young person's family, for instance, or this is, and you can take, you know, you can feel down with that if you, but then also, I think, and it's the same thing we're trying to input with the young person, is that, well, actually they can be still be strong, and they can be, you can be vulnerable and strong at the same time.
Like
you know, whether it's the young person or whether it's you looking after yourself, so you can be vulnerable and feel for the terrible things you're hearing about or having to work with in your professional life, while at the same time trying to be sort of think about the resilience for them and the resilience for yourself. Not to say that professionals can't get to a place where they might burn out, you know, somewhat. You do have to watch that, and you do have to think
absolutely
about, self-care. What do you think, Emma? What's your, I know, saw you
I agree with everything you've just said. Then I think schools especially, I think it is difficult for teachers. I think they take on all the children's issues as well as having their own issues that go on in their lives, and they're under amazing amounts of pressure academically to get these kids to do what they're supposed to do. And when that child's going through something, to that child, that schoolwork's not their biggest priority, but as a teacher, it's sort of got to be. So it's finding that balance, isn't it, and trying to look after themselves because of the amount of pressure that they are actually under. And I suppose, like you were saying with Alosa, with the resilience of young people, it's phenomenal what these young people go through, and they're absolutely amazing. They get through so much stuff. And I suppose it's about, like they say, don't they stand next to the well while the person's in the well, don't get in the well with them, or you're both stuck in the well, you know, keep yourself safe.
Like that analogy, Emma, that makes so much sense.
There for them, you know.
As soon as you start feeling like you're going to jump in the well as well,
you're in there with them.
Of course. No, I think that's such a good analogy, and I like the analogy about the well. I think that's really important. It's so true, though, isn't it? It's so true. Yeah. And I guess it's something that is also, I always think about something about our self-awareness, and also something about having some of that resources and support in place. And I guess I feel very fortunate that, you know, I've got you guys and we've got each other, our colleagues and so on, and our supervision. But I'm just thinking about professionals that don't always have the luxury of that. It must be quite difficult at the best of times. Yeah. And of course a sense of humor as well doesn't go amiss.
I think sense of humor is one of the best cures and remedies for an awful lot of things. And also I think, as you were saying that, Natalie, you know, you were talking about, because you were saying, you know, this is a self-care little theme we're just talking about in this part, I guess. And it is having the support of your colleagues, but in another sense finding time possibly for yourself in ways in which you can sort of separate yourself from. I know for myself, I had, not the last few months, but I used to, you know, regularly go swimming, and find, for me it was the going through the water, underneath the water, and something about, I do a lot of thinking but not actually thinking, if that makes sense. And it might be, maybe that's the sort of meditating sort of element where you're that it is, it's that mindfulness element of thoughts coming and going and leaving. So I think if you can engage in activities, and it may not be a physical activity like that, like swimming, it may be doing some art, it might be playing some music, whatever it is that suits, you know, that suits the individual. But I think any activities like that that enable that mindfulness type of process to go on, where thoughts come in, gone, you know, can be quite healthy for especially when you're in a profession that's overloaded with different things coming, you know, stressful things coming in.
It's that high challenge, high support idea, isn't it? Because we need to nurture ourselves as well. And I know that people that work with children are so often people, you know, they're natural givers, aren't they? They're natural, they're always, you know, putting other people before themselves. They're passionate about what they do. So I just thought, you know, to touch on that would be quite important, really. No, that's so good. It's so rich. I'm loving this. I'm loving all the ideas and what you guys are saying. It's just making me think about so many things. And I think we might have to do another hour at some point to maybe just, you know, because I'm just aware there's so much we're not going to have time to cover. But yeah, I guess I wanted to talk to you guys, you know, as practitioners and as therapists and psychotherapists and so on. I guess maybe can we just, I wouldn't want to, you know, not leave this and not cover this really, but just maybe thinking about some of the things that we could pass on maybe to, you know, what are the things that are important, like, you know, that maybe the things that we just need to bear in mind when working with children, young people, and some of the things that you guys have used just in a practical thing. I mean, I'm thinking for myself, I'm thinking like, you know, letters to my future self, or letters to the person that's passed, and I'm thinking about just like memory boxes and those lovely ideas and creative things really that you can do with young people. And like you were saying, I know you touched on it, Emma, about stories, and but yeah, I just wondered if we could perhaps just think about what might be important to provide for that young person in whatever setting we might find ourselves, really, if we come across someone that really needs that input and that space and time.
Yeah, I think things that promote kind of growth and things that promote positivity, and whether I mean, I was talking before about from young person who had a garden, so I think it could be planting a seed for a, you know, in memory of, in the hope that a plant's going to grow, you know, in that hope of growth.
Yes.
So things that kind of promote all the good things really that are active from that young person. So and that, I think, did you just mention memory boxes kind of?
Yeah, I was just thinking about some of the creative things you guys do. I know you work very dynamically.
So it's taking note, I think, of those things that are going back to what you were saying earlier, Natalie, those things that carry meaning and meaning for that person. So in that very person-centered way, what is meaningful for them to do, you know?
I like that.
What is meaningful for them to put in that box about that loss, or about that, that is a memory that has meaning for them, but then it may be other things in the box that are around the opportunities and the future, and
Yes.
and fantasies about those, and exploration about those kind of.
Wow, yes. And I'm just thinking, Lois, as you said, it's something that the parents or the, whoever in the family can help. And I'm just thinking also it's so sensory as well, like, something that smells like.
So I know there's people who
Yeah.
have built sort of scrapbooks.
So good. Yeah.
Because it can also, and I think it goes back a little bit, once you're able to do these sort of activities like you're saying, Nadine, maybe school can sometimes be important in this, because parents sometimes aren't always in that place to be able to do it. This is what I found, or they might do it, but then they might find it hard to revisit those things when the young person wants to revisit them. And the young person might want to, I've had people who have had like walls up in their bedroom. So sometimes these things can go into like verge into what could be seen as obsessive, and that becomes worrying for a parent. Or how is this becoming too, are we looking at this scrapbook and this memory box too much? And I think sometimes young people, they can feel like that as well, trying to find that balance between using that effectively and getting lost in it as well. But maybe that's where school can, because you were saying, in terms of developing it, there needs to be that open flow, I think, of being able to understand from parents or from other professionals, maybe at school, that the young person might want to do that regularly, or there might be a week when they don't want to do that, or that's not in there. It can be quite relative in that sense, I think.
Yes, and I think it's so important what you've just said there, Lois. So that everyone's pace is different, and I love that all the sensory stuff you're talking about, and I also think there's something about what you said about investing in life while at the same time grieving and finding, what you said, balance. I think that's so key, isn't it? And just supporting that young person when they need to go to the grief actually and need to be sad, because it is sad, but also at the same time also investing in life and going out and sometimes laughing and playing with your friends and having a bit of a so it's so important that we support both those things, really, isn't it? And find that balance and help them. I really like that model, and grieving well and making meaning. It's so important. And you, Emma, how are some of the things you might use with some of your, I know you mentioned stories, and I was very curious about that. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the creative things you do?
Definitely with stories. I think sometimes it depends on the person. Generally with younger children we do stories, and sometimes depending on their level of understanding we'll write the story together, and then we'll do it as a story together, and everyone's a character, and we'll do it that way. And sometimes if it's that they don't understand, and that's what the parent has come for, to get the help, to help them understand, then I would write the story and show it with pictures and images, and just as very simple.
That's so powerful, though. Yeah, that's really powerful. And I'm just thinking about the power of stories, and there's so many great books out there as well, and it just makes sense to the child because their language is play, it is the world of stories. So just so resonates.
Stories have a kind of chain to them, don't they? They have like a route, a journey.
Yes.
They're not kind of, well, they can be, but they're generally, because they're contained within that story concept and form, they have a journey, and it's something that you follow. There's not that confusion of it's got a beginning and an end, or it's got what, and I think that as human beings we like that completeness. Also, the end is a conclusion to the beginning. Often, although a lot of people watch films and dramas nowadays where they're left stunned, aren't they? Like they like those kind of weird endings where you don't know what's gonna.
I'm not a fan, I have to say.
I'm not a fan either. And I think more and more those kind of films are out. I'm like, I'm less likely to watch stuff in case it's that weird ending, and then I'm thinking.
I always find it a bit frustrating. Yeah. I want my happy ending.
I like that. It wouldn't even have to be a happy ending for me.
then.
like an ending.
Something. That's so true. But isn't that so true? I mean, our brains are basically wired to, we want some closure, we want some ending, we want the gestalt or whatever they call it.
That's obviously how they tie people in, isn't it, to watch, because they haven't done the completeness. So you back in to watch the next drama, because it wasn't complete for you. You need to complete it for you.
So we need to make
and
sense
then you're on
of
to the next one.
So it just highlights the importance of us needing to make sense and have that to be able to put in some kind of narrative in our own understanding and mind. And I guess that's exactly where the stories come in. So helpful, Emma. It
doesn't always have to be words. It can be like in pictures. They can paint it and they describe the paintings and the drawings. And it's just, I often like to, some of them bring photographs in, which is nice to talk about them, or even games that they'd played with the person they've lost, that actually they'll come and show me how to play this game, and we'll do a game for an hour that they used to play with Granddad. And that's re-going over bits with them.
Wow. And that's so powerful as well, especially with something they're done with like you say, Granddad, and bringing up all those feelings. Well, but it's not, I always get a sense of it's not so it's almost like taking a bit of the focus off with the game, so the young person doesn't feel so under spotlight or so under microscope. There's something really lovely about that, but letting those feelings and then some of those difficult feelings perhaps come up as well.
And I think it's important not to try and fix everything. They don't want anything fixing. It can't be fixed, can it? It's happened, and it's about letting them organically go through what they're going to go through, rather than having all these things one after another that the same for each child. That's right, we do this and it fixes that, we do this and it fixes that. I think they're so different, and you just can't fix it.
Absolutely.
Yes, I agree, Emma, absolutely.
I like what you said there about not fixing it as if something is broke, when actually this is such a very healthy response to something really sad. Gosh, guys, do you know, so rich and so many lovely ideas. I'm loving it. And I guess I was also thinking, when you said about stories, I wondered about music as well. I know for the teenagers sometimes it's nice to, because that's so emotive, isn't it? It can take you right back to that place, can just change your mood. You know, it's just really powerful stuff. And I was thinking about music playlists, and you know, of course, teenagers are all into their music. I mean, I'm a fan myself. I love music, but they can make their own personal playlists, and photos, like you were saying, so powerful, and collaging. And I was thinking about all those lovely creative things, and of course, not that professionals always have the luxury of time to do that with a young person, but perhaps supporting them in going and doing it with someone who has got that time and can be that supportive resource in their world, you know, and just maybe facilitating some of that stuff really can be quite helpful. Oh, guys, thank you so much. I'm just aware of the time, but I'm just thinking we might have to do another number 2, because there's so much that I still want to ask, and so much that I'm still curious about how you guys work.
And we may maybe there'll be some other therapists from Noah's Ark that can come and join us, and
that would be great.
About some of these things as well, isn't it?
So I just want to thank you guys again for your time, and I just love the passion and how you work, and you know, obviously you're so dynamic and so diverse, and it's just really lovely. We don't often get the time to just really talk like this, do we? So it's been really, really great.
Thank you,
Appreciate it so much. Guys, take care, and all of you guys that are listening to this, you know, I just hope it's been helpful, and just to know that grief, and it's absolutely normal, whatever you're feeling, whatever you're going through, you know, it's a very normal response to something that's really sad, and it's actually quite anxiety provoking. So I just want to normalize that as well. So thank you, everybody, and bye for now.
Bye.